I feel like not many people are going to agree with me on this, or also I feel like a lot of people just won't care, but that's cool. Keep in mind that nothing I say matters and I'm just an idiot on the internet. But I really enjoyed the first John Wick movie, and I was pretty excited to see the sequels too. But in my opinion, each sequel was just progressively worse, in a way that made them extremely unenjoyable to me. The first John Wick movie was a film that seems to have been made in response to the wealth of action films that were nothing but overcomplicated plots, loud explosions, and shitty choreography. John Wick had a simple plot, but placed it in an interesting and fleshed out world. John is only trying to kill one guy for the whole movie, but each little trial and subplot he has to go through to get him there is entertaining and engaging in its own way. The film stayed away from over-the-top unrealism of many other action movies and made a fairly grounded one, similar to something like Ong Bak or The Raid. John had to count his ammo, he wasn't finished with a fight until he double-tapped him in the head. His injuries played a big part in his fighting abilities. I'll be coming back to the injuries thing later. It's fun to watch a man who's the best of the best of the best just continuously get pushed into retaliating and showing off his sick skills. But I want to show you something that immediately established the stark contrast between the first film and the second. We all remember the club scene in the first film, right? Probably the best scene in the movie. Everything about this scene is just great. John gets into the club by sneaking up behind a guard and encouraging him to take the night off.
Thank you, sir.
He then interrogates one of Yosef's men to find out where he is. He being the man who beat him up in his own home, stole his car and killed his dog. And then bit by bit, stealth kills his way down there to Kaleda's Think. This whole stealth sequence alone is so much fun to watch, and the song choice works so well with it. But eventually he gets seen and it erupts into this firefight and a struggle to catch up with his target while henchmen come at him left and right, now set to wild club music. You see the strategies he has to employ to get through so many guys, but in the end he ends up getting taken out by just a random henchman, one of the few times in the movie he's punished for being too headstrong.
Victor's dead.
What a great scene. Now let's have a look at the first scene of the second movie. He's arrived at this place to steal his car back and he fucks up everyone in the building. Now don't get me wrong, this scene is also sick from an action standpoint and is very entertaining. The action works really well and is still working to depict the struggle arc of this fight. This doesn't quite exemplify the worst the series has to offer yet, but a few key things have changed narratively. One thing I liked about John's character was that he seemed to still be trying to be a good person. Like he was in a line of work where he kills people for money, so pretty much everyone is a bad person, but he does still have somewhat of a moral compass. John would only retaliate out of self-defense or when someone seriously wronged him, but always with some sort of justification. Even at his lowest point, he offers Vigo a way out.
Step aside. Give me your son.
John Wick.
Baba Yaga.
It's like a grittier version of Jackie Chan's I Don't Want Any Trouble. I really liked this about John. It was an endearing personality trait and it made it a lot more satisfying to see these guys get obliterated when they kind of invited this pain on themselves. But for this opening scene in John Wick 2, they just throw that out the window. So these guys have John's car, and an important note is they did not steal John's car. It just ended up in their inventory after Yosef stole it. They were unaware it was John's car. As soon as they found out it was his, they were fully willing to just give it back, and you can see how scared shitless they all are.
Sir, why don't we just give it back?
Because then there wouldn't be cool opening fight scene.
These guys are now the ones who didn't do anything wrong and don't want any trouble. But instead of John being like, give me back my car or else, he just calls up and says,
Utebia Maya Machina.
And then he just kills everyone. The fight scene is sick, but John is just kind of an asshole now. The movie could still be entertaining without it, but without the context of John just being an actually decent guy, it just kind of neuters the scene slightly for me.
I mean, that's it, really. He's defending himself. He's fighting for his life. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm going out and doing actually...
I think that was his most endearing character trait, and there's not much else to this character to latch onto. John Wick is cool, has cool car, can kill good, and is kind man. Oh, also is stealthy, but not anymore. Let's have a look at another scene from the second movie. So he sneaks into this place completely undetected by the guards. You don't really see how he does it, like he's underground and then next time we see him he's on top of some ruins, and then the next time we see him he's just already inside the room with his target. But now they've written themselves into a corner. If he could sneak in so easily, then he could sneak out just as easily. But then where will we put the sick firefight? Their solution is just, instead of John having sneaked back out the way he came, he just walks out into the crowd and waits for someone to notice him. And then they start shooting and running and shooting and running and blah 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 blah. There was just no attempt to show what had changed that made his sneaky method of escaping impossible now. It's just, oh, time for an action scene. And so then John walked into view of everyone for no reason and they started shooting. Great job, guys. Not gonna lie, that's just kinda shit. And not that John Wick was some kind of genius masterpiece, but there was clearly thought and motivation put into each of these encounters. And sometimes they even use them as opportunities to show things about John's character, but they really just got lazy with it. There's a scene later on in the second where John wants to kill this dude, so he sneaks into the place without anyone noticing him, and then he just walks back out into the open so a mad firefight can happen. They try to show how John is the best, but why isn't he just like, oh, there's my target, bang. John just kind of appears in the place, hinting that he's meant to be really good at stealth, but not actually showing it, and then completely forgetting that he's meant to be good at stealth and have him just walk out into the open. Well, if John doesn't walk out into the open, then how are we meant to have our big mad firefights? Just show him trying to be stealthy, and then write some circumstance where he gets caught prematurely. How hard is that? You did it in the first movie. The level of effort that went into the context of the action scenes in the first film was completely sacrificed for the sake of having larger action sequences, even though it didn't need to be. And that context ends up being extremely important. To me at least. When it happened yet again in John Wick 2 where he just walks out into view, it just completely tears me out of it. It's so transparent that the writers have run out of ideas to spark a conflict and now just resort to John deliberately getting in the biggest shit show he can without any effort to avoid it. John has no creativity anymore. It's just kind of tiring to watch. John Wick was fun because each scene had the simple premise that worked in the context of the story. The difference between the first movie and the sequels feels like the difference between the old boy fight scene and the old boy remake fight scene. Instead of a great narrative context and a great arc being shown in the choreography, it's swapped out for flashier stuff. Instead of the tight corridors forcing the guys to show up one or two at a time, the main character is wide out in the open for most of it, making it painfully obvious how each fighter is just waiting their turn to run in and get hit. I just can't see how people think the sequels are better. John Wick 2 is just kind of boring. You could watch each action scene on YouTube in any order you wanted and you'd get the same enjoyment out of them as if you saw them in the movie. In fact, probably even more so. That is a bad thing. A fun action scene alone doesn't make it good. It has to add to the story somehow. And John Wick 2 really lost the ability to make it interesting within the story, but it's still not as bad as the worst offender. John Wick 3 was where it just completely lost everything that made it interesting to watch. The first couple of scenes seemed promising. Those first couple of fights were pretty good, bar that one where John was able to control exactly when and where a horse would do its kick. Twice. And also that bit where the guy on the motorcycle has a gun, but decides on just gingerly tugging on John's sleeve, and John responds by taking the gun that the assassin was inexplicably not using and shooting him in the face. And the second motorcycle guy pulls up and is like, I'm not even gonna pull my gun out. Shoot me too, John. Shoot me. Are you even sure that guy was an assassin? He didn't do anything. You can see where they rely on you just turning off your brain to enjoy these scenes. There's this part where he spends like an entire minute just taking apart guns and putting together a new one, all just to shoot one bullet and then start running again. Why did he even bother? Imagine how far he could have gotten in that minute. Was it just so the audience could be like, wow, he took apart the guns and he put them back together again. Oh, he's so cool. He's so professional. He's such a badass. The premises of these fights just don't make sense anymore. Why bother establishing that there's 8 guys chasing John and they're all together in a line if they somehow arrive 1 or 2 at a time, minutes apart? Like there's one guy and he gets shot, then 20 seconds later we get 2 guys, then a whole minute later we get another guy, then another minute later and another guy arrives. I know it seems nitpicky, and for the record, this fight scene is quite enjoyable. This is one of the best fight scenes in the movie. After this, it kind of just devolves into bullshit. You know the way in the first movie they kept it nice and grounded by making John's injuries a big deal? Like he has to go find a doctor and get stitches and take mad painkillers, but it's still affecting him. And then people in fights with him will exploit that weakness. His injuries add up and you really feel that struggle he has to go through to try to stay on top. In John Wick 3, he gets stabbed early on and has to go and get stitched up, but now the film's just going through the motions. This injury doesn't matter, and it won't affect him for the rest of the film. This is the movie where John just becomes invincible. It's so boring to watch because each action scene doesn't have an interesting narrative context to it, and they're more boring than ever. It's no longer him managing this crazy balancing act of trying to stay on top of an outnumbered fight. It's just the bad guys running into frame, getting taken out, and then John waits for the next guy. And that's the thing, it no longer feels like action scenes that are part of a story, they feel like a stunt showcase. And the stunts are still pretty impressive, don't get me wrong, but at this point it's clear that showing off the stunt work was the only motivation for everything that happens. The bad guys run to their own death, or stand there waiting for it to happen. These scenes have no stakes and there's no tension at all. And as such, these scenes just feel like a shooting gallery. There's nothing visually interesting about them, there's nothing compelling about what's happening on screen. It's just boring. Like looking at the first action scene from the first movie and seeing how far the series has fallen. I probably can't show all of this full scene uncut, so I'm going to talk over most of it. But in John Wick 1, you see him planning it out, they show you his strategies, you get to see how he's thinking, you can see him considering what his opponents must be thinking, who, by the way, actually look like they're fighting for their lives, not just waiting for him to throw them. He slinks back into the shadows when he can so he can come back out with the element of surprise. You can see why they call him the boogeyman. Sure, there are stunt falls here, but they all make sense and they all work in the scene. They're not the focus of the scene. And now we have this. Half the time, John is just standing out in the open shooting everyone. He's not the boogeyman anymore, he's the bullet sponge. He's a tank, like, what the fuck? There's no fun strategies, there's no struggle, it's just bang, 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 bang. Haha, doesn't it look so cool? Keanu Reeves actually shot those guys, wow. And these scenes are so drawn out. There's this scene where John and Halle Berry's character are trying to get out of this compound, and you can literally just see the stuntmen standing there waiting to get shot while John and co just walk through blasting everyone. And it goes on for like 6 minutes. Like, this is what I'm saying, it's a shooting gallery. There's nothing compelling about this. It's so horrendously boring. I often say there's power in a movie knowing what it is and playing to that. Like something like The Raid knows it wants mad action and fight scenes, so it has a simple plot that lends itself to that. Even the Mission Impossible movies do a better job at setting up their action scenes. Although those movies are filled with significantly more uninteresting plot and bad writing in between their action scenes. But I think some people take that saying to mean like if it was literally nothing but action scenes, as long as it didn't act like it was more than that, then it was alright. And sure, the John Wick movies aren't pretentious or anything. They don't act like they're some grand masterpieces. But John Wick 2 and 3 have really shown me how bad it can get when you just drop caring about the narrative quality of the action. When it doesn't actually depict a struggle of any sort. When all it is loud noises and the main character miraculously never getting shot. It really highlighted the difference between an action scene with thought and care put into how entertaining it is to watch as its own story of physicality, and an action scene where the only thought was, how can we show off all these different gimmicks? Like, I would always say that The Raid was just a bare bones plot with amazing fight scenes, but the emotional stakes and narrative context to all of the scenes in The Raid is so above and beyond what any of the John Wick sequels offer. At least these films have given me a better appreciation for The Raid. Speaking of The Raid, the dudes from The Raid are in this, and it's hilarious. It's a 2v1 against John Wick, and it's so clear that both of these guys are so much better than what Keanu Reeves can do. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Keanu Reeves' stunts in all of this are really commendable, especially at his age. But it was laughable to put him up against these two and not expect us to notice how these two are having to slow themselves way down so he can keep up. Oh no, I've been flipped onto the ground. Oh, I'm okay. Better. Oh, I've fallen over. Oh no. Oh, I hope he can handle that himself. No. This is pretty bad, but it's made even worse by how often they pat themselves on the back for it.
Nice trick. And so far, you haven't disappointed.
That was a pretty good fight, huh?
Shut up. Oh yeah, this guy. This character really shows how lazy their character writing has gotten. He's just the most fucking irritating character. And not in like a good way where you have a character that antagonizes the audience, but like in a way where I'm irritated by how bad his character is. They wrote him as if his weird fanboyism was meant to be intimidating, but it was just weird.
I gotta tell you, I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. I'm a huge fan. John Wick.
And eventually his lines just become him constantly saying, "We're not so different, you and I," in different phrasing.
We're the same, you know.
We're not the same.
Yes, we are.
No, we're not.
You know, the line that everyone knows to be the classic, lazy, cliche way of writing a villain.
We're the same.
Remember when I told you we're not so different, you and I? We're not so different, you and I.
Like, if they were doing it in a way where it was actually satirizing it or making fun of how awful that line is, then it could be good. But they didn't. They just actually unironically made the entirety of their villain's dialogue in the second half just be, "We're the same. We're like the same person."
We're the same, you and me. We're the same, don't you see?
Oh yeah, and also, that was a pretty good fight, huh? Like, I'm not expecting artful dialogue from an action movie, but this series hit a new low for bad dialogue in 3.
Because sometimes you have to kill what you love.
You, Jonathan, do what you do best.
What's that?
You're gonna die, John. Whether out here on this desert or somewhere else down the road. After this, we are less than even.
We are high table.
And we are New York City.
Stick together, kids. Make sure you're holding the hand of the person in front.
See? That's why you're special, John Wick. I wouldn't have stopped.
You did stop. It was honestly just embarrassing to sit through 2 hours of this. The film had become a lazy parody of the original. The sequels feel like a cash grab and knockoff of the original. I've gone back and rewatched the original a good few times, but the sequels are such a chore to watch. Every scene is just John showing up to another person and he's like, "Hey, I need your help." And they're like, "John, I can't help you, you're excommunicado." And John's like, "But what about our implied history together?" And they're like, "You're right, I will begrudgingly assist you." It does not make for compelling cinema. At least it wasn't quite as obnoxious as Atomic Blonde.
Let's cut the crap, shall we?
The original was a fun and compelling yet simple story about a man out for revenge, and along the way we meet interesting characters, good world building happens throughout, and we have well thought out and engaging action scenes. It was also notable because of how it messed with the tired conventions of the lazy Hollywood action movies. But now it is a lazy Hollywood action movie. The sequels devolved into random action bullshit with less and less effort put into the flow of an action scene and more effort put into including as many redundant props as they could. Oh my god, look, we have dogs now. That means every now and then a dog will run over and bite a guy's arm. Wow, isn't that so cool? Oh, holy shit. Wow, that guy was bitten and then fell off onto some blankets. Oh boy, how exciting. The story sucks and everything feels phoned in. Contrasted with the first, they're just so bloated and lazy. Is it dumb of me to even care this much? But probably. I don't know. I just found these frustrating. Remember in the first one when he gets stabbed and almost dies? Well, in the third one, he survives this. So fuck everything, I guess.